What's up, everybody? I'm Jeffrey. I'm going to be talking about a plugin called FlowGraph. This is for Unreal Engine, and it's essentially a node editor where you can kind of define a start, and then it'll kind of just flow through. And this kind of node editor is good for something like quest systems, or if you want to tell some sort of linear story, linear narrative. And it's also good for branching storylines. And yeah, it's good at organizing it. And yeah, I'll be kind of showing how to install it as well as how to do some basic things with it. So yeah, we're going to go ahead to the releases tab here and go ahead and install a version of Flow. In this case, I'm using 5.5, so I'm going to download the zip from there. So then I'm going to go to the Epic Games Launcher and I'm going to launch a 5.5 project. Okay, so we have this. I'm going to click Games, third person. And for this project, I'm going to be using blueprints only, but we need to compile the FlowGraph first. So I'm just going to show you how to do that inside this project. So I'm just going to say compile test here. Hit create. Cool. So we have it loaded. I'm going to go to my files, downloads, and then this is where FlowGraph exists. So I'm going to extract all, extract. And then this is going to give me the actual plugin folder. You can see that if I open it, there's the Flow uplugin, which is what we're looking for. And then I'm going to go look for the project itself. So this project is located in Documents, Unreal Projects, and then I have it as compile test on the top. Okay, so essentially, in order to add plugins in an Unreal project, we need to create a folder called plugins in this level. So I'm going to right click, hit new folder, and then type plugins. So I created a folder in this directory. I'm going to open that folder and I'm going to basically copy this into this plugins area. So Control C, Control V. It's going to move a bunch of files, and I'm just going to rename this to Flow since that is what the plugin is called. I'm going to close out of here and then close out of here as well. So yeah, we have our plugin inside the project, but it's not compiled yet. So essentially we have just the source files in the plugin, but we actually need to tell the project to use it. So having like a blueprint project, it's kind of difficult to compile it. So essentially we have to convert this project into kind of like a C++ mix, just so we can generate a Visual Studio project, and then that'll allow us to compile the plugin. But once you compile the plugin, you can basically use it without having to worry about C++ if you're worried about that. So here I'm just going to create a new C++ class. I'm just going to have it empty, just create it here. I don't really care too much. Adding code to project. Cool, and just let it do its thing. Okay, and then it tells you to close the editor and build from your IDE. Okay, and then we can just hit no here. We're just creating the class just to basically get Visual Studio Project. So I'm going to click Tools again and click Refresh Visual Studio Project. Just let that run. All right, cool. So now I can essentially close out of this project and kind of reload it. So I'm going to open the files and then go to Documents, run our project, compile test. We can see we have this solution file here. So I think we're pretty safe to just open the project again, and then it'll tell me if I want to rebuild them. So I'm just going to click yes. And then we'll let it start its build. And we can see that it's creating some work. Also, one thing to point out is in order to compile this, you need SDK windows. And that kind of comes with your IDE that you use. So in this case, I have Visual Studio 2022. You can use the most recent version, but by installing this with certain check marks, you can also install the Windows SDK, which will allow you to compile like this. So I'll kind of just go over how to do that. So I have my Visual Studio installer. I'm just going to click there. And then you can click Modify on the version you're using. If not, you can just install a new Visual Studio version. And then the stuff you want to check is the desktop development with C++, as well as the game development with C++. Yeah. And sometimes you can just uncheck this and check it again, and then do the same with this one. And there may be like additional like installs. It just really depends on how outdated your version is. So yeah, I'm going to close these. Now we are in the game. So if I right click, we can see that we have access to FlowGraph now. And if you don't have access to it, you may have to enable it through the plugins. So if you go to Edit, Plugins, and you can see here, we're just going to type. So let me make this smaller so it's visible. Flow. You can see that it's right here. We can edit it, and then yeah, it tells us what version, where they got it from, so on and so forth. So yeah, that is how you get FlowGraph. Now, sometimes having this like solution file and then this like VS Code dependency is like not ideal for some projects. So since we already compiled the plugin code, if we look here real quick, I have Flow, and then it already created binaries for it for Windows 64. These are like dynamically linked libraries, so it's kind of universal to any Windows machine, right? So as long as your team is using Windows, you can kind of just transfer this plugin to a different project without having to have like some C++ involved. So I'll kind of demonstrate that real quick. So I'm going to close out of that. We're going to launch the 5.5 editor again, and we're going to just make a new project and move the plugin. So here, I'm going to go games, third person. This time I'm just going to go my project. Okay, and while that's loading, I'm just going to copy this plugins folder. And then I'm going to open my project. And then paste it here. Okay, cool. And then you can see that this is an entirely Blueprint project. I'm going to close this project and just open it again. Okay, so this project's open. It says new plugins are available, which is a good sign. We could check Flow. Flow is there. And if we right click here, we can see that we have access to FlowGraph. Yeah, so this is only recommended if like your whole team is using Windows. Otherwise, you might want to go a mixed route if you have like Mac or Linux users. And have them just compile it themselves. So yeah, we're going to move on to how Flow works and some basic stuff you can do with it. So yeah. So first, in order to create a Flow asset, I've kind of showed this before, you can right click and go to the Flow tab. Now there's these three assets. There's a Flow asset, a Flow node add-on blueprint, and a Flow node blueprint. I'll kind of discuss what each one does. And we're not going to cover like everything you can do with Flow. There's like a lot of stuff that I'm going to skip out on, but just know that it's a very powerful library. You can join the Discord and try to find someone who has the same like scenario that you want to do. So here, let's start with the Flow asset. So I'm just going to create a new Flow asset. I usually like to do FA, and then we'll call it main story, just for showcasing. Let me make this window smaller. Okay. So here we have the FlowGraph editor. So it's basically kind of like blueprints, right? You can like drag nodes and you can add nodes. And then this is your palette. So there's a lot of stuff you can do here. So yeah, let's start with like the most basic, FlowGraph. So first we have log. This is going to print something. We're going to connect this node here. And then this one's just going to say, hello world. Okay, cool. And then I hit save. And then we can hit play. You can see nothing happens. This is because this is just a Flow asset. We actually have to register it somewhere so it starts playing. So I'm going to do that inside the level blueprint. So let's open the level blueprint, and then we're familiar with this stuff. It's like event begin play. And then how do we access a Flow asset? Well, we essentially need to call something called the Flow subsystem. This gets the subsystem of Flow and allows you to access basically whatever the plugin offers. So I'm going to drag this out and I'm going to say start root flow. Connect this node. And you can see here we have an owner and a Flow asset and allow multiple instances. So we're just going to worry about the Flow asset and the multiple instances. So Flow asset is the Flow asset that you want to start the root. So I'm going to assign that to the main story, the asset we just made. So start root flow essentially means start this. This is the root of the entire flow. asset, and it's gonna execute whatever's there. Okay. Allow multiple instances. This is essentially like if you want to have two of these in parallel, then you can. So yeah, let's go ahead and test this first. So I'm going to hit play. We can see that it ran this, and over on the corner, we saw hello world display out. And yeah, I can kind of show that again. So here we have hello world. Cool. So what happens if we allow multiple instances? Well, that's kind of like this. So we're starting two roots, which is here. So if I hit play, I think it printed twice, but it's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, but that's essentially what it does. If I were to uncheck this, it'll only allow one instance. This is kind of a bad example because I think it's hard for the print to show, but hopefully you kind of get the point. So I'm just gonna leave it as the main story, and yeah, let's go from there. So let's kind of learn how what you can do with Flow. So yeah, let's say we want to have two events going on at once. So I'm just going to use Quest because this kind of showcases the power of Flow. So we have two quests going on, and essentially if we want these quests to be in parallel, we have to make something called a sequence. So we have this sequence, and this sequence runs this and this at the same time. So then this thing remains unchanged. We kind of just hit play here. You can see quest 2 and quest 1. So those are happening in parallel. And then if we want a sequence, like as in just a line, so we want, in this case, we want quest 1 to happen first, and then quest 2. You kind of link it up like this, and then we're going to add a timer here just to showcase a delay. Okay, and then once the timer is completed, we will output to quest 2, and we'll make this like 3 seconds. Save it. Let's go ahead and test it. We got quest 1, and then quest 2 shows up. So you can see that it happens in order this time. All right, so that's pretty neat. Let me just, okay. So that's kind of the basic of how Flow works. Let's kind of look at the other ones. We have like a branch. This is like true and false. There is sequences. Wait, we talked about that. Sorry. There's play level sequence. So if you want to play like something cinematic, you have access to a sequence here, and you can kind of just decide when to play sequences. Okay, and then there's something useful we should talk about, which is subgraphs. So basically what subgraph does is it opens another Flow asset and allows that to run. So how is this useful? Well, let's kind of try to showcase that. So we have this main story, and let's say we have kind of like a side quest. So this is side quest 1, right? And basically, let's say this side quest is kind of convoluted. So there's like a lot happening here. Okay. Just say it and then okay, so we have this kind of this long side quest, right? And we want to kind of, instead of putting it all inside main story, what FlowGraph allows you to do is essentially start another flow graph. So in this case, we have a start here, and then we have this storyline, but we also have the main storyline, which is here. So maybe it's like save the princess. So in this case, what we can do is we can have like a sequence here, link this up, and then while we can save the princess, we also have a side quest going on, which is like this. And then we can hit asset and then set this to the side quest. So then if I go ahead and run this, we can see that these play right away. So in this case, these two are running at the same time. Now, we can see that there's this finish node on the subgraph. So let's kind of see what this does. So I'm going to say side quest completed here. Okay, if we run this, we can see that the side quest doesn't get completed. So there's this node called finish. Finish basically tells the node that it's done. So if I drag it out here, we have finish. Once this reaches the finish node, it'll basically go on to the next node. So you can have a side quest kind of stall until they're done. And once they call the finish node, you can progress to the next quest or whatever. So here, I run it. It says side quest completed. This is because we added that finish node. So yeah. All right, so we've been discussing a lot of flow asset. Let's talk about the other utilities that they have, which is an add-on and a blueprint. We're going to talk about the blueprint first, since that is probably the most easy to understand. So basically you pick a parent class. I'm just going to pick flow node. And then I just call it flow node blueprint. And then we're just going to call this test. Can't think of a better name. So right here we have some familiar icons and stuff. So yeah. So here we have event execute input, pin name, and then cleanup. So essentially, as I said before, there is a start and there's kind of like a finish, right? So when you create a flow node, it basically registers it inside your palette. So here we have something that's uncategorized. This is called BP test. So if I drag it out, we kind of have this execute pin and this output pin. So this is execute input and event cleanup. So basically execute input is whenever an input reaches this node, it basically runs whatever is here. And then event cleanup, this is when it finishes. So here we could say the princess is saved. Okay, so whenever this finishes, it will call event cleanup. So this is where you can add kind of functionality that kind of messes with the real world here. So yeah, let's kind of look into how to do that. So here we're going to open the blueprint editor and yeah, let's quickly set that up. So first I'm going to add a delay just so we could see it better. And then here we're going to add kind of a timer and then just make it like 5 seconds just so we can see the difference. Okay. So yeah, let's kind of make this BP test delete an object in the world. Let's delete like some important object like this cube. So the thing about FlowGraph is it's a runtime. It's basically runtime programming. So every blueprint can only have access to things in runtime. So what that means is we can't store the object directly in as a variable. We have to basically say, hey, we want to reference this object, but we don't know if it's going to exist until runtime. And that is called a soft reference. So I'm just going to call this cube, and I'm going to make this an actor. And then usually you do object reference, but again, this is a runtime plugin. So we have to use soft object reference. So I'm going to click that. And then here we can compile and we have a default value. So here, this is where you can drag this cube here. Now this blueprint has a reference to this cube. And then we can kind of just use this cube. So get cube, and then we can do something called resolve soft reference. And this converts it to an actual object reference. So it's basically saying we have a soft, kind of like a pointer to this cube. And then as we run the game, it's like saying, well, let's try to find this actual object. And then this is where we can do something like destroy actor. All right, cool. So yeah, this will execute input. So this is when we save the princess, it's going to execute right away. And then the timer princess saved. So yeah, let's give it a run. Okay, I think there's a lot going on with this side quest, so I'm just gonna get rid of it. Let's run it again. So we have save princess, and we can see it's still stuck inside BP test. This is because we never told it to run the output pin. We basically never told it to finish. So in order to make it finish, we want to do something called trigger. And now we have trigger output pin, and first output. So essentially in these flow nodes, you can kind of decide how many output pins or input pins you can have, and that you can make them do different behavior. Again, this is kind of like how complex flow node can get, but we're only going to be just touching the surface level. So the default pin they give you is out. If I wanted to add another pin, I could just click here and say something like cool, right? And let's kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to hit compile, save it. And then this thing doesn't update automatically, but once I drag a new one in, you can see that it added that output pin for me. So you can make these output pins like run whenever you want. Again, we kind of looked at trigger. So we could trigger output by pin name. And then there's trigger output pin. So this tells you like the actual pin you want to output. Oh, sorry. If you double click these kind of open the C++, which, you know, gets you that finer detail. I'm just going to close out of this. And then the final thing is trigger first output. And this is kind of what we want to do. So actually I'm going to undo, and you can see that all these nodes have something called finish. So this lets you decide whether the node itself is finished or not, which is useful, right? I'm going to delete these, and then I'm going to mark this as finished. And then I'm going to delete this, and I'm also going to delete that pin we made. So I'm just going to click here, delete, and compile, save. So I actually didn't showcase that it actually deleted the actor. I'll just go ahead and do that right now. You can see that that cube just got deleted. And then in this case, we wanted to connect this. Compile, and then click here, save the princess, and then we wait 5 seconds. Princess saved. All right, cool. So there's that. And now let's talk about branches. So as you know, we saw that there's this thing called add-on blueprint. We're going to go ahead and just create that. And we're going to make it inherit from this add-on. So I'm going to do flow node add-on. And then I'm just going to do is princess saved. Cool. Okay, so this add-on basically allows you to, it's kind of like an attachment to a node. So I'm just going to delete this bottom part, and yeah. So let's say we don't know if the princess is saved yet, but we want to continue on and print something. Maybe the princess died here, okay? So then in this case, we want to create a branch. So what you can do with add-ons is basically you implement an interface that tells you where you want the branch to go. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So here, first you go to class settings, and then there's this thing called interfaces. And then you can basically add an interface to override. Again, this stuff kind of has to be self-researched, but yeah, in this case, there's something called predicate interface. So I clicked that, and it basically added it to my interfaces here. It's right here. It's called evaluate predicate. So if I double click this, we're overriding it. So you can see this value is true or false. If I go into the main story, let's say, is the princess saved? And then otherwise the princess just died. So in this case, what I can do is I can click this branch, and I can right click, and then it says attach add-on. We can see here that we have and, not, and or, and we have that add-on node that we just created, which is princess saved. So if I click this, we have it here. And right now it's set to false. So what happens is once this is done executing, it goes on to evaluate, and evaluate basically runs the add-ons. And then this add-on either returns it gets the value from this function, and it returns true or false. In this case, it returns false, so we should expect the princess to die. So yeah, let's go ahead and run this. Save the princess. Princess died, and we can see that that's kind of what we expected. Now, if I set this to true, essentially you hit play, and now the princess is saved because I set the condition to true. So yeah, and you can also do other cool stuff, like you can do and then attach another thing. So then these two are anded together. We could kind of, this is kind of a bad example, but I think it's better if we do or. So I'm going to right click, delete, add on. I'll do or. And then here, I'll kind of just duplicate this one. And then we could call this something like princess nearby. So you can maybe only save them if they're nearby, right? Okay, so let me open up the relevant tabs. So here, I'm wondering if I could move. Okay, so let's say if the princess is safe or she's nearby. So in this case, like if one is true, the other doesn't matter, right? So if I set this princess saved to false, but she's nearby, let's just say we can save her. Wait. Okay, maybe I did something wrong. Okay, that might be a bug, but I think maybe it evaluates. Okay, well, maybe I'm going crazy, but let me see, and let's kind of delete. And that princess died. Let's check these both to true. Compile, save. Okay, this is kind of what I was expecting, but there might be something buggy with the or maybe I'm just using it wrong. I don't know. But yeah, you kind of get the power of this. Yeah. Another thing is we kind of want to talk about how actors communicate with FlowGraph. And basically what that does. So essentially we have our game here, and sometimes we want to, you know, wait for something to exist. So that's where like actor registered comes in. And then they use like some sort of tag system. So yeah, let's kind of talk about that. So we have third person blueprints, this third person character. This third person character is not registered to FlowGraph. To register it to FlowGraph, you have to add a component called flow. And this makes it possible to communicate to graphs. So here we have flow, and here you can kind of do something like notify. And then here we can notify an actor or notify a graph. And then you can notify a certain tag. So I'll kind of just showcase a simple example here of, let's see if the actor gets registered first. So obviously, maybe we don't want to run all of this until the character exists. So in this case, you register the flow component, and then you create a tag called like player. Well, in this case, we want it, you can create like new tags here. So in this case, maybe I want to put it under flow and I want to add a sub tag. So then it's like, you know, follows by a dot. We could just do like the player here. Actually, I think it's better if we just create a whole new player tag. Okay. Oh, and then there's also the source. This is like where the tag exists. Sometimes you can have multiple sources. So in this case, I just have this player thing. I hit player. And then this flow basically registers itself as a player. If I go here and I do on actor registered, so we start, if the actor gets registered, then we can move on. So if I hit play, oh, right. Inside this, it's missing the identity tag of something, which is the player. So we want the player to exist, right? So it's saying if this player gets registered, we can do something afterward, right? And then we can see that it runs perfectly fine. Now, if I were to remove this tag from this player and I hit run, nothing happens because it's waiting for this tag to get registered. And looks like we're getting some errors. Yeah, basically it's erroring because this thing has nothing on it. So yeah, we add player here and then we can do something with that player. Yeah, and then you could say something like on notify from actor. So let's say we wait for this player to get registered and we want to wait for the player to do something. In this case, we want the identity tag to be from the player, and we want to be notified of maybe something like, let's create like a sub node here and then call it like interacted. Okay, so this created the interact. So, well, we got player and we got notified from like some interaction. Okay. So in this case, let's see. Let's say we do like key. Let's say they press the key E, which is pretty standard. And then this is where a blueprint can notify a graph of what's happening. So I go to flow and then I basically do something like notify graph. Okay. And then notify tag. What do we want to notify? We just interacted. So yeah, let's see if that works. So I hit play. Nothing's happening right now, but if I press E, boom, it reacts. So yeah, that's kind of how the tag system notifies this. Also, like sometimes you get errors like this. You just have to clear them like every time you run it. And then like this thing won't show up again. But yeah, you can see how we can use this tag system to kind of notify from the actor to the graph. And then there is other stuff like notify actor. This, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, right? You want to go from graph to actor and stuff like that. So yeah, that is kind of the power of FlowGraph. There's a lot more to it. We have like, maybe you want like repeated quest. So like, let's say you have like a subgraph here, and then this is like your side quest. If you want it repeatable, you can just like connect it back. I don't think it, both are on the same node. Yeah, let me see if this is even possible first. Yeah, something like this. So then after the quest finishes, it just starts again. This is kind of bad because this doesn't yield. It'll probably crash the game, but yeah, you kind of get the, I guess, the flow of this this plugin. So yeah, very powerful tool. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. Obviously, another thing you can explore is something called Yap. So we have Yap UE5. Let me see if it shows up. Yeah, it's by Homer Johnston. And this is kind of like a dialogue system that's built on top of FlowGraph. So that's something else you can explore. I might even talk about it in the future, but for now, we're just showcasing just how to use FlowGraph and how useful it can be. So yeah. If you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, just thanks for watching.